You're listening to the Immersive Audio Album Podcast.
Please listen with headphones for the best spatial experience. Hey everyone, I'm Jonathan, head of music at Immersive Audio Album, and I'm here with our lead developer, Cameron. This is the 5th episode of the IAA podcast, and as always, we want to thank all our listeners who've tuned into previous episodes. And if you haven't, be sure to check those out using the links below. So in past episodes, we've talked about the history of multi-channel music, how to set up your system to experience albums mixed in 5.1 or Dolby Atmos, binaural audio, and more. But today, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the industry landscape as it exists today. Like, who are the big players in immersive audio? Who are some specific labels and artists putting out high-quality product in this format? And once you have your system set up, where should you go, and whose music should you investigate first?
Yeah. Let's say, for example, you've just built an immersive system. Which artists and labels should you start looking at, Jonathan?
Well, I think the most important thing to say right off the bat is that it's a really good time to be a fan of immersive music and to be buying albums in this format, because there's more available than there ever have been in the past. I mean, there are so many new releases just looking at physical and downloads alone, discounting streaming, that I can't even keep up with everything that's coming out. And, you know, there's so many different artists and labels we could talk about, but I think it's impossible to have a conversation about immersive music without first mentioning Steven Wilson. Now, I know we've talked about him a bit in past episodes and some specific albums that he's worked on, but for me, I would say he's kind of the guy that single-handedly kept surround music alive at a time when the format was largely dead. So this is around like 2009, 2010, when the big record labels had stopped releasing albums on SACD and DVD audio in 5.1, you know, like we talked about in the history episode. And right around that time was when he started doing remixes of like the King Crimson and Jethro Tull catalog. And throughout the 2010s, sort of the momentum around his work built to the point where by the end of the decade, he had been getting to mix like really famous albums, like, you know, The Who's Who's Next, one of the most famous rock albums of all time. He did the Tears for Fears catalog, the Ultravox catalog. I mean, there's too many to talk about. But I think it's important not just to mention the remixing work he's done for other artists, but also his own musical career, because he's been making music since the early 1990s. And I would specifically point to his last two records, the Overview and the Harmony Codex, as really showing off what immersive audio can do for music. Especially for the most recent record, the Overview, the Atmos mix is the definitive version. Like, once you hear it in Atmos, you'll never want to hear it in stereo again. So I think a good segue from there would be to talk about Rhino, which is Warner Brothers' catalog division. And as anyone who's been paying attention to this area knows, they've been releasing tons of albums in 5.1 and Atmos. And Rhino's history with 5.1 goes all the way back to the DVD audio format in the early 2000s. But recently they've been releasing some interesting stuff on Blu-ray disc. Like, for example, they've been doing what they call this Quadio series, which is a series of standalone Blu-ray discs where they're taking old quad mixes from the 70s and releasing them on a modern format. So you get to hear the quad mix as it's originally sounded from the half-inch master tape and without all the issues that come with decoding old vinyl and tape formats, you know, like we talked about. And it's sort of been interesting to watch this because each of the three big labels seems to have a different approach when it comes to releasing immersive music. In the case of Sony, it seems like most of the albums they've remixed for Atmos or 360 have been released exclusively on streaming. And then with Universal, it's been sort of a combination where there are some albums that come out on Blu-ray, usually as part of like a deluxe box set, and also, of course, streaming. But with Warner Brothers and Rhino, they've been doing a lot of standalones. Granted, some box sets as well, like the Yes reissues with Steven Wilson's mixes. But just last year, they started a series of standalone Atmos Blu-ray discs. They've put out some great titles. One I would point specifically to is the second Chicago album that Steven Wilson did the mix for. That has to be one of the best remixes of a vintage album I've ever heard. The classic Fleetwood Mac albums, the self-titled and Rumors, have come out on Blu-ray with Atmos. So those are great releases to pay attention to if you haven't already. From there, another label I'd point to is KScope in the UK, which is kind of like a indie prog rock label. And they kind of pioneered 5.1 during the 2010s, during that sort of dead period where it seemed like releases were slowing down. Through them, I learned about, some of my favorite artists today, specifically the band The Pineapple Thief and their frontman Bruce Sword, who also has a successful solo career. And it's worth pointing to that KScope is one of IAA's partners. We've been partnered with them since 2021, and we have, I want to say, more than 20 albums currently available on the site, either in 5.1 or Atmos. And some specific ones I'd point to are the new Envy of None album, Stygian Waves, which has Alex Lifeson from Rush playing on it, and also Bruce Sword's most recent album, Luminescence. And then from there, the last label I wanted to talk about was Beggars Group, which is this big indie conglomerate that has various different sub-labels, including, 4AD, Matador, and Rough Trade. They've been doing a ton of remixing in Atmos, both, new records and old. Some specific ones I'd point to would be Spoon's Lucifer on the Sofa, which we've talked about in prior episodes. Great example of a modern rock album mixed well in Atmos. And on the vintage side, back in 2022, they did a Atmos remix of the Pixies' classic album Doolittle from the early 90s, which you can now also get as a high-res download on the IAA shop, and it sounds incredible. So definitely check that out if you haven't already.
You've mentioned specific mixers here and labels, but I was wondering if there's such a thing as a person who specializes in immersive mastering.
Well, that's a really good question because, as you know, like in the world of stereo, there are mastering engineers who are known for that kind of work. People like Doug Sachs or Bob Ludwig. You'll see their names on so many records that have been released over the years. But one of the interesting things about Atmos is that sort of because of the nature of the object-based files, it's not really possible to use traditional mastering techniques. So originally, I think when a lot of Atmos mixes were being released, they were just going out unmastered. But in recent years, we've started to see some engineers who do specialize in mastering immersive music. I mean, most notably, I would point to Michael Romanowski, who's based out of San Francisco. And I interviewed him a couple years ago now, and definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't already. He's worked on so many great projects. I mean, he mastered the Atmos mix of Prince's Purple Rain that came out recently. He mastered the new Atmos version of Ray Charles's Genius Loves Company, which we have up on the IA shop. He's mastered at least some, if not all, of those great Tom Petty Atmos mixes that Ryan Oliate did. He's definitely one of the people who's pioneered the practice of mastering immersive music. Another one I'd point to in this area is Justin Gray, who's based out of Toronto, I think. Once again, I've done an interview with him. And he's probably best known for mixing the Atmos version of Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style, which is one of the most famous rap albums of all time. But he's worked on, hundreds of releases, either mixing or mastering. But actually later this month, he's going to be releasing his first solo record, which is called Immersed, suitably. And the idea behind this project is that he's basically conceived the album from the ground up with immersive audio in mind. So not just like recording extra parts to pan around the channels, but also using like 714 microarrays. I mean, I think this is going to be like an incredible release. And later in this podcast, I've actually done an interview with Justin talking specifically about the release, which is going to be available both on Blu-ray disc and as a high-res download on IAA. So that's going to be really exciting.
I also wanted to ask you about what you thought about the Immersive Grammy Award. Why do you think the Immersive Grammy winners won, and what made those particular mixes so good?
Well, it's an interesting question because I used to kind of feel in past years that there was kind of a bias against non-classical releases for the Immersive Grammy. Like if you look at some of the albums that have won in past years, and that's not to say those releases aren't good. Like I think the work that people like Morten Lindberg and Jim Anderson do is incredible. But it does seem like that has changed lately. I mean, if you look at the last couple years winners, like the most recent winner was the new Peter Gabriel album I.O., which sounds incredible in Atmos. And one of the cool things about that record is that the immersive mix actually has like separate overdubs that were recorded to enhance the experience. So that's a really good example of how, typically when albums are remixed, like it's all about honoring the stereo version, particularly with older records, and sort of making sure you're using all the right parts and it sounds like the same record you're used to, but that you're inside of it. But in this case, since it was a new record, they had the freedom to kind of experiment and make the immersive mix stand on its own rather than just like an expansion of the stereo. So I'm glad that it won the Grammy and the Academy recognized that that was kind of an interesting new practice.
I wonder if you and our audience would agree with the choice that the Grammy committee chose as the Immersive Grammy winner. But listeners, if you don't agree, let us know in the comments. We know sometimes our votes don't align with the Grammy community, so IAA actually hosts our own awards via our yearly Listener's Choice Awards, which we usually start in the October-November months, and then we to take nominations, and then we announce the winner in late January, early February.
Yeah, exactly. And, just for reference, some of the past winners include the Frank Zappa album Overnight Sensation, which has an incredible Atmos mix done by Karma Auger and Eric Goebel. Mr. Big's self-titled album, a classic rock album from the early 90s that Chris Bell did a fantastic job mixing in Atmos. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' Greatest Hits, again, a great Ryan Ellie 8 mix. And one of the interesting things we've been doing is we've set up separate categories for physical and digital releases, so like a high res and streaming releases. So the audience gets to nominate two different albums. One that was their favorite that they streamed because there are so many Atmos mixes exclusive to streaming services, and the other being that either they purchased on Blu-ray disc or they bought as a high res download. But it is such a tricky thing because like everyone's preferences are different as we've talked about in terms of what they want to hear from a multi-channel mix. In fact, just recently I went on another YouTube channel where myself and the other two co-hosts, we sort of debated what some of the best multi-channel releases of all time were, and we all had different items on our list. Like there was not a single overlap. So I would encourage sort of anyone who is maybe displeased with what some of the Grammy selections have been in recent years to definitely cast your vote during the Listener's Choice Awards when they start up again in just a few months. So from here, we're going to take a break and come back after to hear my interview with Justin Gray.
This podcast is sponsored by Immersive Audio Album, your #1 online hub for all things surround and immersive music. On our website, you'll find album and equipment reviews, interviews with industry professionals, and a whole lot more. In our online shop, you'll find a large catalog of high-res digital downloads in 5.1 surround sound, Dolby Atmos, and R3D. At IAA, we believe fans deserve to own their music in the highest quality possible.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Immersive Audio Album podcast. So today I'm joined by a very special guest, which is Justin Gray. He's a award-winning producer, mixing and mastering engineer, and an artist. And today we're going to be talking about his upcoming album, which is very appropriately titled Immersed. So, Justin, if you want to just kind of introduce this project and sort of what set you on the path to making this record.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Jonathan, and for everything you do for immersive audio. Such a pleasure. So, Immersed starts with me as a composer. As you mentioned, I'm an engineer. I've been in the immersive audio space for a long time, over a decade at this point, and have worked on a lot of music, which I sort of refer to as spatial remixing, which is reimagining music in spatial formats. I've also had the pleasure of working on some music that was designed and sort of created with immersive in mind. And ever since, or even why I got into immersive in the first place, is because to me, it's just sort of how I imagine music. And I think that's why I love working as an engineer in the formats like Atmos. And so as a composer, I've been working for a while to really just think of like what is the potential when we write music for a three-dimensional space? What are those realities? And I've been, creating music and doing a lot of work in the field, but eventually I got to a point about 4 years ago where I sort of had the vision to create this project, which was to write music in the sort of styles that I sort of am involved with as an artist, which is certainly jazz music and Indian music, forms of South American music and West African music. And, there's a lot of influence I have as a bassist and as a producer and as a composer. And so bringing all of that together, but using the immersive space and using Atmos as the canvas. And so that's really like the seed. That's what I wanted to do started writing the music and using the technology to sort of help imagine things in space. I don't want to we'll probably go down this more specifically, so I'll do the fast version here. Is eventually, once I got to the studio, this project, I'd already come in with the sort of three-dimensional aspect of it imagined. And so the way it's recorded, the way it's produced, the way it's mixed, it's completely immersive first, all the way from composition to how the mics were placed to, of course, the Atmos mix is not a reimagination of something. It is the mix. It is the music. So that's sort of the overview of the record.
Yeah, I mean, so you and I did one of these interviews, I guess just under a year ago now, where we had this sort of very exhaustive discussion about the idea of spatial remixing. And I think the conclusion we came to is a lot of the job is kind of like deciphering people's intentions, like on these older records, where you're taking these recordings that are, mono and stereo tracks that were never intended to be mixed into a 3D space, and you're trying to create this like retrofit experience that simultaneously is something new, but it honors the original sound. But with this project, all of that stuff kind of goes out the window because there's no question about the intention, because you are the artist and you're the mixer. So I guess what kind of changed in your approach here versus on those spatial remixing projects?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And you're right. It was very liberating, to be honest with you, in both capacities. Of course, as a composer, like I said, like this is how I imagine music. I think it's hard to fully explain that to somebody, and that's where the technology comes in, right? Like the Atmos in this case is allowing me to actually express the music the way that I would like to, the way that it sort of feels to me naturally. And so that's where technology sort of becomes a part of the intent, which is fascinating. And through working on so many projects, it's helped me to understand what my intent is. What do I like about this artistically? What do I find aesthetically sort of inspiring? But when it comes to being able to connect that with also being the mixer and also in the recording engineer side and the producer side, it just means that I don't owe anything to anyone but the music. And it's, like I said before, it's liberating. As professional engineers, we have a lot of responsibilities. And as we discussed in that other interview, we have to juggle all of those things. And that's a part of being a professional engineer or a producer or, any of the above. But in this case, I only had to answer to what I wanted to do, and whatever the limitations were, of course, there are always limitations in a musical project, whether it be time or whether it be a budget or whatever. But I really tried to put absolutely every resource possible into this project to allow it to unfold to be exactly what I wanted it to be. And I found it nothing short of inspiring. It just opened up things in every lane as a creator, as a recording engineer, as a mixer, to just say like, what do I want this to be? And then when you want to make it that, you just do it. For instance, maybe we'll get into this later, but like, of course, there is a stereo version of the record. It's a completely different mix. I had to start almost from scratch because this really was only ever conceived for me as an immersive presentation, even from imagining the music like before it was written down. And so that's a different challenge, but to be able to just not have to consider any other format, I wasn't even considering headphones. I really conceived this as for 916 at all stages until I felt it was done. And then, of course, and we can get into this, like, then we get into some of the specific technical requirements of being an engineer to make sure that it's all gonna, do its job on the back end.
So when it comes to this idea of like making an album for immersive, I think there's kind of like two schools of thought. Like there's like the Morten Lindberg approach where like you're actually like using these multi-microphone arrays to like record the space that the instruments were in. I guess you could call that kind of like the natural approach. And then you have other examples like, say, Ryan Oliate's record, Act 3, or even what like Buff did with Peter Gabriel's latest record, where you're intentionally like layering up parts to use the extra space. Like instead of recording, 2 doubled vocals, you could record like 8, stick of them in each corners of the room. Listening to this record, to me, it feels like you're kind of using both approaches.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And when you say, first of all, you named 3 of my favorite folks on the planet, so happy to be in their company. Morten is one of the immersive producers on this record, and I have studied his work since the beginning of my work in the field. I have approached a lot of immersive music through the lens of what you're calling sort of like a natural approach. Although actually, if you read the liner notes, the foreword is written by Morten for this record. And we've discussed this a lot, that even in his case as a recording engineer who's using a single microphone array to capture an entire ensemble, it still is trying not to recreate total realism, but rather to create something that is actually beyond realistic, something hyper real, but in a very naturalistic way in a classical ensemble. What I love about the feeling of a well-captured immersive, let's say orchestral recording, or even smaller chamber ensemble recording, is I love the absolute feeling that a proper microphone capture gives where the speakers truly disappear. And what it's to do with, and again, this is something that Morten's done a great job to educate the world about, and is about time of arrival. So when a sound is captured in a really beautiful space properly with the correct positioning of the microphones, and then we reproduce that on an Atmos system, let's say in this case, our brain is comfortable. Immediately, it just settles into experiencing the sound. Where sometimes when we're having to do it in a digital way, we're having to place mono sources or use digital tools, there can be, not all the time, but there can be problems that arise, and just like the brain doesn't quite fully accept it. And it's on a very, very subtle level, but in my experience, when I've experienced things to be captured in their most natural state, it can become this feeling. It's more of a feeling that I'm chasing. And I wanted that feeling for this music. But it's not classical music. It's not orchestral music. There are orchestral elements, but this is fusion music, right? Like there's a drum set, there's electric bass. I'm happy there's synthesizers as well as strings and brass, and ultimately there are 38 artists on the record. And there's a lot of variety. So I wanted to approach the capture of the instruments from that perspective, to be able to have every single layer have that feeling that I'm describing, that sense of a natural capture, but I wanted to produce it in a completely contemporary way, which is maybe more, when we discuss Ryan or Buff in that way. And of course, so many other records. And so that, and what allowed, I think, this to happen was because when I went into the studio, the music was already composed to be orchestrated. And I think that's the word that we need to explore, is like the orchestration, spatial orchestration. The idea of actually writing parts to be in certain spaces. That might mean having 7 to 15 layers of vocals, or that might mean that the record opens with 15 different layers of kalimba. Why 15? Well, 9 and 6. That might mean that I want the brass behind me or the strings in front of me. I do want the drums in front of me. I do want the kick and the electric bass in the center channel. I want the soloist in the center channel. But I want other aspects of the production, tabla parts to wrap around and udu parts to be on the ceiling. Like since these things were conceived largely in advance of the studio, the opportunity was that I could mic them accordingly. Because I knew where they should sit, I could set up the mics to allow that to happen. And a very quick version, I think the example I use the most is the brass on this record are orchestrated behind the listener always. So there's a trombone in the left surround speaker, there's a trumpet in the rear left speaker, there's a trumpet in the rear right, and there's a trombone on the right surround. So it's a brass quartet. And they're featured on, I think, maybe 4 or 5 of the songs. So when I brought them into the studio, I set them up with close mics because I still want that intimate, contemporary fusion, jazz, pop kind of aesthetic of super clear, hyper detailed. But then
I mean, my first thought listening to it was Snarky Puppy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would think that would have to be one of your references.
Oh, I mean,
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe we'll come back to Snarky in a second because absolutely. And then there's an array of an 11-channel microphone array, very much, in the style of Morton's work as an example. And Y11 is 7 and 4, 7 on the main layer and 4 up top. But the brass are addressing the back of the array so that in the mix, I don't have to really use any reverb. I have the closed sources, and then the reverb is captured so that the reflections of the brass in the room and the studio we recorded in is beautiful. It's already there. So we actually set up a 9.1.4 system in the studio so we could hear it in real time. And that way, the brass is behind me. It's orchestrated where I want. I still have close mics so that I can ride levels and do all sorts of, contemporary mixing things. But all of the space is already there according to where it's orchestrated. Now, would it have been awesome to put everyone in the room? Maybe we can come to the snarky thing. Would have been amazing for me to have the opportunity to put everybody in the room for the record and record this in one space at the same time. Yes and no. Of course, the answer is yes, in the sense that there's nothing like just putting everyone together. There's always going to be something. There's always going to be some magic. But the no is that when you do that, the kind of reality that comes in as a mixing engineer is I wouldn't be able to spatially mic every instrument exactly how I wanted because I want to mix perspectives. I want to be able to have the brass behind you in that way while there's 15 kalimba layers, while there's synthesizers all around, while there's overdubbed vocals by the same vocalist 8 times or 10 times. And this would be something that would actually be physically impossible to create in a space. Doesn't matter how much resources I had, even if we put scaffolding up and tried to put people around the array on the ceiling, and it would not be possible to put people with the correct proximity to the microphones. And so once I realized that, I actually embraced the idea of doing it not at the same time. And now, from a snarky standpoint, yeah, I mean, so Michael and Moz and that whole band were the same age. They were at North Texas State. They all came up through that school system. And when I was at Humber College in Toronto, they used to tour to Toronto and play the Rex, which is one of our favorite jazz clubs. Like I remember the first time they dropped a video, they pretty much blew up YouTube, in my opinion. I've known them for a long time, and we share the same influences also behind there, like in terms of who we listen to, where we came up, what our collective experience is. But of course, this is the band that did it. They toured the world. They got in the bus. They did the hard work, and then of course have taken it to the greatest heights. Larnell Lewis, who's one of their drummers, we went to school together. I teach with Larnell, so I know the folks well, and absolutely, I adore what they do. I adore their music. I adore their commitment to their music.
So going back to what you're talking about with the reverb, like, did you use any digital reverb at all in the mixes?
Absolutely. again, there's no rules here. So as much as I captured everything at source, this is where when it comes to mix time and you come back to intent, right? The intent is all that matters. So if I'm listening to it and I'm like, yeah, I just wish this had a longer reverb, put on a reverb. Because the studio space, like it has its fixed sound, right? I wasn't tracking the brass in this studio and the strings in this studio. Like we were in one consecutive or one space for close to, I've been counting it up. It's like it's somewhere between 35 and 40 days of studio recording, which is a lot. So my go-to, of course, is always to use the natural sources first. But then once you start to layer things on top of each other, there are times where it's like, yeah, you know what? The strings just need to be even more lush. So a digital reverb would come in. This is actually a discussion that when Morton joined, and there's two co-producers on this, is Drew Jureka, who's the violinist on the project. He's the primary co-producer on this project. He's in it from the start. He plays on it. But Morton and I had approached and said, Morton, I would just love your ears on this once I get to the mix stage. And I, mixed the music as far as I could and then sent it to him. And those were some discussions that we actually had together. So even though, Morton comes from that naturalistic thing, he was listening to music and saying, you know what? There are aspects of this that could use a longer tail. Like he's like, it's a lovely space that you've created, but this is surreal music. So it would be lovely if that string ensemble could just breathe and have a 2 or, a 5-second reverb tail or something along those lines. And so I started to integrate that at the mix stage. And then there's one other thing that I did, which was the soloists for this record are always in the center channel. And there's a reason. First of all, I love the center channel. Secondly, it is jazz music, and therefore soloists are the primary storytellers a lot of the time. And there's nothing like a center channel to tell a story, right? It captures our energy. But also, since there's full video for this, my intent for the listener is that they're looking forward, right? Is that they're sitting and they're watching. And since I also took this, it's been screened in movie theaters with Dolby and et cetera, all of this was conceived in terms of where those are orchestrated. And so Morton was listening, and he had this comment where he's like, okay, I really like this center channel thing, but as a classical engineer, I'd probably want them to be a bit more reverberous, or reverberant, sorry, that's the correct word, and to glue into the space more. And this is actually where we went back and forth. I was like, okay, I hear you for sure. However, I also like a jazz record, like a jazz fusion record. I want the soloist to step on top of the ensemble. That's it's just something I like. I like that kind of record. Think like Snarky or Headhunters or Shakti. Is we give a little bump to the soloist. We make sure they're crystal clear, almost like a vocal in a pop song. Maybe not quite as aggressive, but you know what I mean. And so he was like, okay, let's try some reverbs to see if we can sort of glue it to the space while still getting the halfway point. And none of their digital reverbs were doing it for me. I just found that they would get washy. They sound really lovely. They sound lush and full, but I was missing that sense of a pinpointed kind of reflection, a realistic reflection. So what I did was, I know the folks in Toronto at the Aga Khan Museum quite well. I've performed there more times than I can count. I actually performed for the Aga Khan himself multiple times on bass vina in their auditorium. So I called in a favor, and I went in there for a day. And it's called worldizing, but we can think of it as immersive reamping. Played the soloists back, isolated tracks on a speaker into the hall, and captured a giant concert hall with a 15-channel Sheps array on the main layer, a 5-channel DPA array, and even a 4-channel Omni array hanging from the rafters, which is 80 feet off the ground. And that's actually the primary reverb for every soloist on the record.
I mean, there are certainly some moments, like for me listening to the record, where it feels bigger than my room is.
Yes.
And I assume that's sort of the cause for that. Yeah.
Totally. And honestly, it's like faders up. So much of this stuff is just correct microphone placement, high quality capture, careful attention to detail at the source. And then it's just like, now all of a sudden I've got, let's say the vocalist is doing a soloist or the saxophonist or the trumpet player. And as a mixer, now I can just mix an entire concert hall as a separate source, a totally separate source. I can ride it with the solo. It's it's amazing. And I mean, this goes, the concept, again, the concept is called worldizing. This goes back. I mean, think of Capitol Chambers, or Bill Putnam did technically the first one that is at least documented of re-recording a vocal into a bathroom to get sort of like a slapback reverb. The concept is old school. And again, it's that thing for the brain where the speakers disappear when the reflections are real. I just find, for me, going to the intent part is like, yes, this is the feeling I was looking for. And it's really just chasing that feeling more than anything.
I mean, on the flip side, though, one of the sort of what could be an issue with this approach is the musicians have to play really well. Because I'm imagining, like, say, like there's a bad note in one solo. It's not like you're just editing one track. It's you're editing that and your 15 channels of reverb at the same time.
Yeah. Now, exactly. Couple things there. First of all, these musicians are amazing, right?
Yes.
Like, and so I don't see that as a problem. I just see that as like the folks who are on this record are all near and dear to me. Very close. I've worked with every single one of them as either a bassist or a producer or an engineer, and many times all three. Many of us go back 20 years. We've toured together. We've been in school together. We've, long time relationships. And these musicians they're badass. Every single one of them is just an absolute world-class artist. And that's why they're there, right? I write music. I write music for people. When I write, I think about the person who's going to play it, because then I know, and I have all the confidence in the world that they can achieve it. And I also, I hear their sound as soloists. These are all brilliant improvisers with a pretty unique voice to themselves. And so that was never a consideration for me. Like, I knew I bring in this brass ensemble. Again, I know them all, whether like Christian Overton on trombone and William Karn and Kevin Turcotte and Brian O'Kane. I mean, if you look into Canada's sort of brass history, you're going to find like hundreds and hundreds of records that these people are on. It's just the highest level performers. So when I bring them in, or the string ensemble, anybody, I don't even need to think about whether they can achieve it or not. I know that they're going to sit down, and as long as we're in the right headspace, as long as I capture it well and I'm in the zone as a producer, we're going to be good. Now, part two of that is I edited. For sure I edited. At the end, I tell my students this all the time. I mean, if you don't want to edit because there's some sort of aesthetic preference to not do so, great. At the end of the day, I want to do whatever makes the music reach its full potential and meets my intent. And so I'll cut between takes in a solo. I'll fix a bum note if that's the take and we just need to fix that one thing. I mean, I personally am looking for a certain level of accuracy because the composition needs it. I didn't need to do too much, but I had no shame in doing it. And so when I went to do the reverb recordings, that was post-editing. That way, it's already done. Again, which is, you're right, because actually editing together those reverb takes and then starting to mix and match takes, you'd start to get into some really tricky stuff. It's all possible. I mean, I'm a very good editor, but you can make things work. But again, the brain starts to notice when those things start to fall apart, when there's a lack of continuity. So to a certain degree, doing the reverbs afterwards, it almost solidifies the edits. And I hadn't thought about this, but it like sort of solidifies it into one performance on a very realistic level again.
I mean, one of the things I've noticed generally about kind of the ways that reverb can be used in an immersive mix is that it helps kind of glue the whole thing together. Because a lot of times one of the issues you face, especially with mixing older records, is by spreading out these parts, it can sort of make the whole soundstage fall apart.
Yep.
Because you want to hear the detail of the individual instruments, but also particularly like with rock, like it doesn't always work to separate like rhythm guitars from drums.
Yep.
But if you have, say, the drums in the front and then the guitars are maybe in the wide speakers or in the side speakers, and there's a reverb return sort of hitting all the speakers, it sort of helps make it all feel like it's in the same space.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's what bleed is. That's what reverb in stereo is. I mean, it's always been not only a thing for pushing something further away from us as a listener, but also to, again, those reflections give us a sense of realism, even in hyper real music, even in pop music. Obviously, reverbs can be used in very aggressive ways, but like on a nice classy pop vocal, like let's say a nice Adele ballad or something, those reverbs are there to help us sort of glue the whole thing together. It glues the vocal to the ensemble behind it. And it's very important. So in this case, like as you originally asked, I mean, I want to use whatever tool is at my disposal to realize the music, and that's it. There are no rules. There's no sense of this is right or this is wrong. It's just like just chasing that feeling, chasing that sense of when has this composition fully come to like be the thing that I was imagining.
Now, I think it's worth noting for the listeners that on YouTube, you've been releasing these videos that you made during the sessions where you like do these very detailed breakdowns of either like the mic setups or in some cases like Pro Tools layout. So it's all out there, like sort of the exact process of how you made this record. And those videos are fascinating. So I would recommend those to anyone who hasn't seen them. But one section of the record that I would specifically point to is perhaps maybe the ultimate moment of using the immersive space is in the song Pendulum, which was, I think, just released as a single a couple days ago.
It was released on Friday.
There's this effect in it where it's hard to describe, but there's like a tabla part, and the different layers of tablas are sort of moving throughout all the speakers. So I'm listening on a 714 setup, but you could hear the different tracks sort of moving all around and above you. So I'm curious if you could speak to sort of how that was achieved and the intention behind it.
Absolutely. And when it comes to YouTube, actually, since that song just came out, there is actually a long form video that came out today that digs into this with some visual examples and such. But the tabla, like the core of that composition is the tabla composition. And Ed Hanley's the tabla player, and he came and we co-wrote this because he came with this wicked 10-beat tabla piece. And you know, we typically with tabla, you'd perform it on one drum, maybe you'd overdub two at the same pitch. But there's a thing in Indian music called a tabla tarang. And a tabla tarang is the idea that you play a tabla composition on a bunch of different tabla in different pitches. And we both have always talked about it'd be so cool to imagine. It feels like immersive audio was what is missing for really representing what a tabla tarang is. Because they even set the tabla up in sort of a semicircle, hemispherical kind of way. So this piece is, we record the tabla on every pitch in the song on different drums, full performances. So a C, D, E, G, A, B, C. Ultimately, because the tabla has two pitches to it, it builds a Lydian scale. So a C Lydian scale. And so I orchestrated it very specifically that this note will be here, this note will be here, this note will be here. And when they're all playing back together at the same time, you're hearing all of the notes of the Lydian scale at the same time, all separate performances. I swear there's basically not even EQ on those tabla. Like there's no synthesis, there's nothing. It's just the sound of capturing it. And of course, while we were recording it, I'm listening in real time, being like, oh my gosh, move the mic a little, like just get the mic capture to just do the job that you need it to do. So that's the main groove. And as you hear it, it's just like there is no dominant tabla. Even though C is the key of the piece, they're all equally mixed. So dependent on the performance, you hear it sort of come up here, just based on the micro dynamics of the performance, right? Because if you've got all the tracks at the same volume, but then this one pops a little, this one pops a little, this one pops a little, that's where you're sort of hearing it as though it's moving, but it's actually just as if you had 7 tabla players surrounding you, playing in toward you, all on different pitches and playing real tight.
Yeah.
Then you get to the breakdown, and the breakdown is it's really flying around the space overtly. And again, there's a video online now with this if someone wants to visualize it. But what I did is, this is where I got into sort of the concept of almost serial composition, right? Which is creating tone rows or pitch sets. Now, typically serial composition is 12 tone rows. We use all the notes of the chromatic scale, but this is just 7, right? Because there are only 7 notes in the Lydian scale. So I took the tabla compositions, and 7 at the main speed and 7 at the double time speed. And I took the double time stuff and I wrote a whole bunch of speaker shapes. By that I mean like a 15 speaker shape bouncing between all the speakers in a 906, a 7 speaker shape on the lower level, a 6 speaker shape for the 6 on top, a quad plus quad speaker shape that goes quad, 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 quad. So I figured out the speaker shapes and how I wanted them to align. I figured out how they would sort of cross over each other. And then I duplicated and like basically created hundreds of duplicates of the tabla performances, lined them all up so that they were organized in tone rows per speaker shape, and cut it all up into 16th notes, muted it all. And then what I do is I just unmute the tabla that I want. And like, so for instance, C is always in the center channel. G is always in the rear surround. So when I unmute it, a 16th note will pop up in that speaker. But underneath it, it is actually the composition. If you play it back through a mono speaker, it's actually like hearing the single performance as though the pitch was changing every 16th note. But none of it is pitch manipulation. It's actually just, these multiple takes all being organized that way. And that's about a month's work, honestly. By the time I sat down, figured out what I wanted to do, my assistant Andrew Chung helped with the editing as well. Like, we had to go cut it up, draw all the fades at the end of every single one. I haven't counted it, but there's got to be thousands of 16th notes that happen over the course of that interlude, because there are multiples all layered on top of each other, and it gets denser and denser and denser. And the thing that I wanted to make sure is that at no point in any of the patterns does the same pitch or speaker fire at the same time. And that was the trickiest part, was going through and being like, oh no, like at this moment, the C's happen in the center channel. So I'll offset it by a C. Like, it's wild.
So, I mean, you answered one of my follow-up questions, which was, I was wondering if you did it just sort of by sticking each part on a separate object, or if you did it using pan automation to literally,
No, so it's not pan automation. So
yeah.
it's like, again, it's as if you had a gate on real performers, and then the gate moves and only allows 1/16th note to go through to the listener, dependent on the pattern that's being, used at that time.
Well, I can't imagine if you did it with pan automation, like literally the breakpoints.
No. It would, you know what? At that point, it would be so tedious that it would get in the way of the music.
Yeah.
Right. And that's part of it, is like setting up systems so that you can be creative. And it still was tons of work. But when you're first thinking about it, right, you've got to be able to, it's almost like you just wish that you could just click a button and it would happen. Of course, like, well, that's why there are producers. That's why there are engineers. Like, we have to do the work. But creatively, it's like the thought of it is actually very fast. I want this to happen. And you're like, oh, that's going to be a lot of work. So then you go and do the work. But realistically, if you were able to almost perform into it, you're going to react to it differently. Where the thought you had in week 1 versus the thought you had in week 3, it's like you can lose that thread. So I really do think the ergonomics of it and being like super fast with the DAW and choosing the path of least resistance is a big part of it.
What would you say is like the average track count on these mixes?
I think it's probably about 500 as an average. There's the song Tapestry gets up there. I did count it. By the time I get into all of the Foley, all the forks and knives, all of the metallic objects, as well as breaking out some of the MIDI performed implementation stuff that Sean did, that one crosses 1,000 for sure. And then there's a song. Actually, I wonder if any of them are. I think that a song like Beyond might be more about in the 400 territory, because there aren't any crazy production things. It's just that drums is 38 channels unto itself. Brass is another 30. Strings is another 30 because of the microphone capture. So it adds up fast when there's 20 instruments on it and all of them have that many microphones. It adds up quickly. Again, the key is being so organized and understanding the DAW intimately. Like, Pro Tools is my instrument at this point, right? Like, it's not just a DAW, it's a compositional tool, it's an editing tool. I know it inside and out, because you can't make mistakes. If you make mistakes with track counts that large, you're backtracking. And you know what I mean? Like, in some ways, there's certain things you do that would be almost impossible to undo. So you need to move forward like very, very organized. But and even though there are that many microphones, though, it's important to remember they're not all at unity gain. Some of those arrays are turned way down. Sometimes the close mics are turned almost off. Like at any point, the combination of close intimate capture to sort of, ambient reflection capture is constantly at play.
So I'm sure you get into this like in a video, but in terms of staying organized, like what is kind of your strategy? Like it's just a lot about using buses and folders to sort of, yeah.
Buses, folders, groups, 50,000 hours in the DAW, right? Like you do have to be at a point when, you get to a point with your DAW where you can anticipate the mistakes 5 steps ahead, and then you don't allow them to happen. And I say that it's like, you know what I mean? Like at a certain point, like it is about as complicated of a project as I could ever conceive of. And there's constantly some kind of mistake that could be made, not having groups on. Now, some of the problems I ran into is like I had to set up 2 computers just for this record to work, just to press play. 96K is no joke on the computer with the kinds of plugins and track counts, and even with an amazing Mac and a full HDX system, all the UAD tools to sort of offload as much processing as possible. At the end of the day, there's a bottleneck somewhere. I think it's got to just be in raw hard drive speed. And so, again, there are things where you do need to commit at a certain point in order to move forward. You need to get something somewhere, and then you need to commit it down and be like, okay, no more. Like I need to freeze these tracks, or I need to commit these tracks. I also did use a lot of analog in the mixing process as well, because I wanted to put the vocals through some compressors, or I wanted to use my Pultecs or use my Ferns. So I commit things as well. I think the key is with this particular one is just being able to see the big picture at all times and anticipate what you're going to need when. And that's why, like, there's that video about routing the record. I spent a significant amount of time thinking all the way to the cinema remix stage. What am I going to need on that day? And then backtracking until before I even started editing to say, okay, because that's what I'm going to need, this is how I have to organize this record.
I mean, I can say with absolute certainty, it's the biggest delivery I've ever gotten for IAA. And I think it will always be the biggest delivery. But so you mentioned earlier that for most of the time you're working on this project, you were thinking just about 916 or 906.
Yep.
But eventually at some point, and this is something you said the last time we spoke that stuck with me, which is that if you're going to release something in Atmos or in another object-based format, essentially you're giving up the ability to say, like, well, you have to listen to it on this kind of array for it to sound good.
Yes.
Because the point of those formats is the translatability.
Exactly.
So when you got to the point where you were happy with how it sounded in your studio, how much did you have to alter the mix to translate like to smaller size arrays like 714, 5.1, and binaural?
Great question. And the good news is not that much. 714, honestly, no, nothing. The translation of what I put in the center heights, it finds its way into those other height channels very reasonably. It's all, and also like, because everything on this record is decorrelated, right? Like there's no time when I had to use a mono or stereo source and try to split it into 2 zones. It's like, there's always other information. And that helps because it means on fold down that you're not going to be experiencing crazy phase issues. Now, at least certain fold down. So 714, good. 5.1, I just had to get the trim settings correct. There's a lot of information everywhere. So a lot of times, when we deliver records, a lot of times the default is just keep everything like all levels stay the same. And for a good pop mix, I find that that's generally a pretty decent practice. I always check though. With this record, it was very specific and very specific per song. It's like, depending on what's going on, depending on how many multiple instrument orchestrations, like where it's the same instrument being panned around a lot, I would just tweak a little bit. Binaural, The key was objects, because objects, by using all the objects, hence the giant delivery, it allows for binaural render modes. And so, I'll give an example. The drums are off in the front. And that's because there's already ambient microphones and ambient capture in the mix. The whole point is dry up front and ambient. Like, that's the presentation. So from an intent standpoint, when I go to the headphones and the mid setting or the near setting adds early reflections to the source, it loses its feeling. So I do use off in those settings. I did not allow myself to make any tonal or level-based sacrifices from the speaker mix for binaural for this record. And actually, I like listening to it, especially in AC4 IMS, like the Dolby binaural. Once I got the right combination of binaural settings, I like it. I'm personally, I feel as though it conveys the music. But the key was like bass, tabla, drums. They had to be off, as well as the front wall for some of the soloists as well, because of the way that I wanted to, create this relationship of like the space moving out from the instrument. Binaural render modes were important. Then we get to Apple Spatial, of course. Take all of that and just throw it in a blender. I'm a fan. I like it. And what I find with Apple Spatial is that if you create a well-balanced speaker mix that's quite immersive, I find Apple Spatial behaves itself. This is not just my record. This is any record I work on. Is it slightly different? Are there tonal changes? Yes, it's the nature of the beast. But I was definitely not going to, I like it. Again, I'm proud of it. There's nothing that I wouldn't want someone to listen to, which I think is important, right? And like you said, like most of the time, like this time I get to say that. Someone can disagree with me. They can say, I don't like it. And that's fine. They can also say they like it. All I'm saying is, as an artist and engineer and producer, I have full control over whether I like it or not. And I feel confident in liking it. And that's sort of fun. It's a liberating feeling. Now, so does Morton. So does Drew. Again, other people who are involved in the production team, they've also listened to it. They've also made comments. They've also signed off on the experience. But in this case, it's totally different than when I'm delivering a record that has a stereo counterpart. And I'm like, ooh, I got to make sure that there's this closeness. This time I'm like, you know what? This conveys the feeling of the music. And at the end of the day, there's no doubt that the speaker mix is my master. And that's what I made. I made it. That's it. I'm not sacrificing something for any reason. But fortunately, I think that the approach to making it and the technical approach to making it and the mix itself, I find in headphones that it's okay. The one area where that was not true was stereo.
Now that was going to be my next question. So a lot of people I've talked to have these different theories about delivering stereo, the process of delivering stereo alongside immersive. In a lot of cases, it's like you mix it in stereo first, and then you just kind of blow that out to immersive using the same Pro Tools session. I've talked to other people, like I talked to Nathaniel Reichman, if you know him.
Yep.
And his idea is to start in Atmos and then derive a stereo from that. And some other people are doing that too. But in your case, from what you were saying before, you actually mixed the record again in stereo.
Exactly. I have delivered hundreds at this point of songs where we started in Atmos and I delivered the stereo. First one I did was a Jonathan Kochuk record, which I think, is that on IAA? I think.
No, I mean, well, I've been trying to get it, so yeah.
Well, then if Jonathan watches this, or even if not, I'm calling him and it's happening. That record, Everyone, was Atmos. Like that one, we started in 2017 before there was even a way to even conceive of sharing the music. We were going to do a binaural delivery. Then it took a long time, and COVID happened. It took a long time. So by the time it came out, Atmos was now on Apple Music. I used the stereo render of that got mastered properly as a stereo file for vinyl, for CD. That one is on Blu-ray. That one is on DD plus Jock, and that one went to a cinema. So that concept, to me, I'm all for it if it works. But I listen to the stereo folds, and again, from an intent standpoint, I was just very disappointed. And my co-producer, Drew Drecker, was very disappointed. He's like, no, this is losing all of the detail of what this music is. The feeling is gone. Even if the parts are audible, like there's a sensation that's missing. And so he was very helpful. He was instrumental in sort of snapping me out of it, because both of us recognized what remixing it was going to mean. An insane amount of work and another 4-month process. And this is after like 3 years. So, and because I did not consider it in stereo once during the until Michael Romanowski had finished mastering it. Not one time. Because that's not what it is. And it wouldn't help. All it would do is make me think about something that it's not. And I didn't find that was going to help my decision making. So I take the Pro Tools sessions and I remove all of the immersive panning, which is all the buses, because I found it, as soon as I went into stereo mode, all I cared about was creating a stereo mix that conveyed the feeling of the music. And a whole bunch of things. I realized a whole bunch of things immediately. First of all, I didn't need half of those microphone captures. Of course not, right? Those are literally captured to be able to represent space through speakers. So there was a process of going through and choosing what to keep and what not to keep, purely through through the lens of stereo listening. There was also the concept of composition. This was the trickiest one, and it took me a little while to rewire my brain. I actually started it, and then I walked away from it for a little while, because I was like, I gotta let go of some things and then come back to this and just mix it as a record. And that's a hard thing to do when it's your own. It was very hard. We considered maybe we sent it to someone else just to get a new perspective, but I didn't wish that job upon anybody. I don't think I could have afforded anyone that I wanted for the amount of work it was going to be, because it's epic delivery. And I didn't want to, and I wasn't going to stem it out for something like that. Was just not happening. It needed to be built. So then the big question is, like, the compositions here are very much front, sides, back, top, right? I don't do a lot of writing in the Atmos world where there's antiphony, like left to right. I don't do a lot of like, oh, there's a soloist and there's a soloist. I'm not against that. I'm just saying that's not what I did. So as a result, when it all folded on top of each other, it actually was sort of boring, because there was no left-right conversation, which is what stereo is, right? You write something for stereo. Think about a symphony. When you write for a symphony, you write left to right. You write from the violins to the cellos and back, right? It's this sound stage. It's perfect. When we go to classical music, we can change that like Morton does and put people around the mics. But in general, we're talking about the sound stage is the proscenium, right? The concept of the stage coming out towards the audience. So what I realized is like, oh, I need to redesign the whole antiphonal concept of the record. I need the brass and the strings. They used to talk to each other from the back to the front. Well, that now needs to be left to right or right to left. And that was the hardest part. So I erased all panning automation, everything to zero again. And all levels. I kept whatever plugins I could. Like if the plugin would fold down to a stereo version of itself, I would keep it, because maybe it would be good. The record's not over compressed anyway, so it wasn't like I needed to undo things. But so once I conceived of the conversation and the composition in like a 2-channel capacity, then I could start mixing again. And slowly but surely cutting microphones, cutting this out, removing microphone channels, getting rid of things I didn't need, redesigning reverbs. There are effects. There are even sections in the stereo where I'm like, you know what? In immersive, this was so enveloping, but now in stereo, it's like, actually, I'm just going to add delays to this because it'll make it feel more magical like it did in the Atmos version. And so, and again, I did the opposite. Not once, and I mean it, not one, and it's not that I wasn't one toggle button away from it at all times. I never compared the stereo to the Atmos going the other direction. Not at any stage. The only time it ever happened was once I finally had all the master files. I had it all set up in a session, and I was like, I should probably do this once. Because two things. First of all, I don't care I don't care if they're the same. I don't care if something changed. All I care about is that the mixes bring the music to life. And in this case, I do get to be the source to say when the music has come to life. And that's unique. It goes back to your first point. Like, it's the rare opportunity to be like, and for better or for worse, again, I'm not suggesting that that makes it better, or, if anything, it's a heck of a responsibility. And I do have people I can lean on. I do have my co-producers that I can lean on in these cases. That's what teams are all about, right? It's like, because this is a lot of responsibility for one person to take on, and that's why production teams are the best. So yeah, there were all sorts of things that changed, levels, how much kick and bass I wanted. I wanted more in the stereo version. I was like, man, I compressed it more. I had to carve EQ. I had to use EQs that I never had to use in the immersive version to make space for things. It was hard, to be honest. It was harder from a clarity standpoint, because of course it was. In Atmos, I've got 15 speakers plus my LFE. I composed the thing where it's like basically everything gets its own speaker all the time. I recorded it that way. It was a dream. And now all of a sudden I have to fit all of this intent into 2 channels. And at the end of the day, I'm really happy with the stereo mixes. I find that it brings a certain life to the music that's different, that's very exciting, and again, maybe a little bit louder, a little bit more, a little punchier, because now I'm in stereo world. And of course, having a mastering engineer, Michael Romanowski, to be able to then be able to say, all right, I'm done here. Your turn. Like, finally, someone else is allowed to manipulate this, because maybe I have made the stereo a little brighter. Maybe I have made them, like those kinds of things eventually are going to come out. And that's what mastering is. And again, a liberating feeling to know that someone as talented and caring as Michael was going to be there. So it's also about creating those systems. But anyways, I hope that answers some of the questions about the stereo process.
Certainly. Now, I would say you've gone above and beyond, not just in making the record, but also the ways it's being released. So as you and I know, most Atmos mixes just go to streaming services, and that's just kind of where they live. Aside from some, every once in a while, there's something that gets released on Blu-ray. But in your case, there's not only Atmos mix on streaming, there will be a Blu-ray edition, and there will also be the high-res download at IAA. Mm-hmm. So if you want to talk about sort of what's on the Blu-ray and the download and how those are different, and yeah.
Absolutely. So of course, when we come to, if we start at the bottom, just to scaffold it, we come to streaming, we have our Atmos delivery and our stereo delivery. Those are the DD Plus Jock when it comes to the Atmos, Spatial for Apple for headphones, and AC4 IMS for Tidal and Amazon and Deezer. And then the Stereo Master, which is delivered as a 96K 24-bit master. Then when we go up to the Blu-ray will have the Atmos, TrueHD, which is the lossless 48K version of the record. And it does make a difference. It really does. Now, I'm all for it. I honestly, though, I like the DD Plus Jock too. I think that it translates well. I think that if someone's listening to this music, I'm all for it in any capacity, in any way. Binaural all the way to the cinema version. I'm just honored that someone wants to listen to the music. And I've been careful to know that I'm confident with every stage of it. But the TrueHD on Blu-ray, or of course with IAA, which I'll get to next, is exceptional. It conveys the kind of spatial clarity that the record was made for. It really does convey exactly what I'm listening to when I'm listening to my 90, like it's not 96K, but like when I'm listening to my high-res ADM master, I find that the Blu-ray or the MKV in Dolby TrueHD does it. Now that Blu-ray will also include an Oro 3D stream, which is a 714 that is now lossless, 714. Although the TrueHD is also lossless, so it's just another way that someone could listen to it. And the stereo high-res as well on the Blu-ray, so someone can do it. But the one difference is that the film is there. And it's something that we haven't even really touched on yet, but
yeah,
this entire project is a film to me as much as it is a record. And people call it a visual album. I prefer calling it a cinematic album just because I see it as cinema. and because there is a version that's meant for the movie theater. So when you press play on the Blu-ray, the album film plays along with it in a fully seamless way. You can select the different tracks, of course, but you can also just watch it as it was intended. One record with a full film to accompany it. The film is largely featuring, beautiful capture by Michael Fisher, who's the co-director of the film, in the studio. Like, we captured every artist with 4 to 5 cameras, beautiful lighting. Every day was just as much intent on the film side as it was the capture side. It's an immense amount of work to do, and Michael did a great job of being able to create this world. But then we've also captured dance performances and nature performances, and also the pendulum art that is the album cover. We've captured all of that stuff, is integrated into this cinematic album film. So, and then on the other side, there's a CD.
They still make those.
They still make them, and Stefan at the record's coming out with Ian Records. So Stefan Bach, who's also the co-founder of, basically invented Pure Audio Blu-ray. Morten Lindberg was also involved in that process, and so he's like, well, it's not that much to add a CD, and if someone happens to have a CD player, go for it. And it's like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have thousands of CDs. I love CDs. I think that they still have a weird place in the world for those of us who use them, because there's the ritual and there's I don't know, there's just something still about it. So it's like, let's put the CD in there. So the package is like a deluxe set with the Blu-ray, the liner notes, which is a beautiful 23-page booklet, gorgeous packaging. I'm so happy with it. Actually, I have it now, and the CD on the other side. So that's the deluxe physical version of it. What you've done, and when you did it, it was monumental. And to me as an artist today, it's just even more meaningful now, because it's actually facilitating something, is you've created a way to be able to deliver that high quality Blu-ray experience for those who don't have Blu-ray players. And I've known this for a long time. I have records on the service that I've mixed, but now the package, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to have the Dolby TrueHD of the record. We're going to have the 96K Oro of the record. We'll have the 96K stereo of the record. We can now also deliver the 96K binaural, which I have personally pulled from my Atmos masters. That's awesome.
Yeah, it sounds great.
And just the combination of those things to be able to deliver that in the organized MKV format that you do is so great. And then the one other step that we're going to do to be able to honor the cinematic aspect of the record is, which will be unique to IAA, which is very cool, is this touches on the cinematic part. This being a film, I have created a film version that has a short little intro with me, hopefully saying something thoughtful and inspiring. The record transpires, and then there's like a 7-minute credits reel, which is almost like a little mini documentary while the credits are happening. And it actually features a piece of music from my last record in Atmos, and I remixed it just for the credits. And so that experience of just watching it top to bottom, so we're going to put the 48K files to keep the file size to a reasonable size, and then high definition video files, so someone with the MKV package can also get the deluxe version, press play, sit back and just watch a movie and just watch a cinematic album. So that's awesome. And then there is, did I get all that right?
I believe so.
All right.
Yes. And the great thing about this project is that it's rare that we get to use all the capabilities that the MKV format has.
Yeah.
It supports not only multiple selectable audio streams, but also HD video. And we're using all of those functions for this project. So yes. I always enjoy when we get to use it to its fullest capacity.
Yeah, the same with the Blu-ray. It's like with Stefan, we're pushing it to have all of that on there. And it's we're still at a time where, even if, and my fingers are crossed, I do hope to be able to bring the visual, the cinematic record to some form of streaming capabilities in the future, but that's not a reality at this moment. But even in that case, the Atmos would be a lossless format. So in no matter how we play this, the MKV TrueHD and the Blu-ray TrueHD, it really is the way to experience the music. For those who have systems, for those who appreciate that kind of listening experience, it really is the only way to be able to truly get that fidelity of sonic experience. And, we're at a time in history where it's possible. And I think that that's amazing. Again, like that being possible is a big part of why I'm able to make this record. Like, I think one of the reasons I haven't made it before is that the tech wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
Technology and art always do this. And so for me, it's like, okay, wow, I've done this. I've mixed thousands of songs in the format. It's like, man, this can happen. Like if I can, pool the resources together and make this happen, I can share the music exactly how I'd want to. Where prior to it, it's like, it's not exactly how I'd want to. And that's enough to sort of stop you from doing it. Say, I'll just wait. So it's pretty cool. Now, the one final tier is the Cinema Master. So
Yes,
when we talk about Dolby for cinema, like going to the movies and watching a movie in Dolby Cinema, the Atmos format is actually contained in what's called an MXF, which is very much essentially an ADM. It is full lossless audio, and it's spatially lossless. So even the TrueHD still has spatial coding. For me, it doesn't matter because it's a 916 record. I'm still within the maximum clusters, which is allowed, not to get too technical on it, but essentially that's the maximum number of clusters. So really there is no audible reduction in spatial imaging when it comes to the TrueHD. I can say that quite confidently. Like it will play back in 916 on someone's system as intended. But the cinema version is like an ADM. And what you actually have to go to a dub stage and have it authored. But more importantly than just authoring it, the way I designed this record was that when we got to the dub stage, the master acted like an immersive stem out. So the object groups became strings, drums, horns, soloist, percussion, bass, tabla, vocals. All these things were separated in objects. And when I load that into the Pro Tools session at the dub stage, I have a lot of control to be able to remix the master for cinema. And we moved objects to fill the gaps because in San Francisco, when we screen this with Dolby, they have 67 speakers, right? There's no point in thinking about 67 speakers for a home entertainment production. There's no point. But in the cinema, 916 is actually very limited. 916 doesn't exist in cinema. It's only a home entertainment limitation. In cinema, you have LCR, and then you have your 712 bed, and then basically everything else for objects is all about how many speakers in the room. So you really have to see that. You have to see the three-dimensional space, and for me, my philosophy was using objects to be able to create that clarity. And so the Cinema Master is like another remix of the record. I'm not talking, again, all subtle decisions just to be able to translate the music.
And there is a video where we can see you sitting at the dub stage talking about this.
Yeah. and so I've done 3 screenings now. Toronto at Massey Hall, so like a 200-person audience. Dolby in San Francisco at their headquarters, the most beautiful movie theater I've ever stepped foot in. It is just over the top. With another, almost 200-person audience of incredible San Francisco folks. And then at the Vine with Dolby in Hollywood. All large-scale audiences, but getting to play the record back with the full film in all of its glory. And it's an absolute dream. Absolute dream. The sonic fidelity, the experience. Of course, the detailed experience that we have in home entertainment, it's different. We no longer have that sense of like super immediacy and intimacy, but it's in exchange for this grand concert-like social experience while still being very, very detailed. So yeah, the record goes all the way from, I guess, the lowest quality version that someone would be able to hear, if we have to go that way, would be the CD, right? 4416 in stereo. And I like it. I liked it so much that I made one. All the way up to the Cinema Master and everywhere in between.
Well, I guess sort of the question I'll leave you with to sort of end this conversation was, after, all the time and hours spent on this project, I guess, what would you say, 4 years, 5 years?
4 years, including the writing phase. Yeah.
4 years. I guess what were kind of like your takeaways from this project? I mean, I'm sure you've learned things, in terms of your skill set, producing and recording that can apply to other projects.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So many things. But first of all, I'm reminded that for those where this will serve their music, this is where I'd like to be involved. I love being a mixer, but really at a production level, I think that being able to help artists to unlock their music in three-dimensional capacities is somewhere that I will put a lot of energy, because it's where all of the various things that I do sort of come together. And so from that perspective, it's just something that I feel fully engaged in. The second is your music is only ever as good as the people who play it. And so the gratitude I have to the people involved, and not just that, the film, that your film is only as good as the people who hold the cameras, is only as good as the people who edit it, right? You can conceive of something, you can imagine something, but at the end of the day, this music is about people and it's about community. And so the gratitude I have for those around me, and I guess the takeaway is like, never, ever, like the takeaway is the reminder, and the simple reminder that it's all about the performance. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many microphones, it doesn't matter how many formats. It only matters if the music moves us, and that's at the source, is at the playing level. So it's all about having the right musicians in the room to realize the music. And I think the other is it's not like a takeaway that like, oh, I'll do this next time. Like I did a massive amount of pre-production for this record. And it's the only way, because at so many stages now, when I'm releasing the music, when I'm doing the cinema version, when I'm doing the Blu-ray, when I'm delivering to you all the assets, and you're like, okay, I need this, and I have them all. They're in a drive, they're ready to go. I can just email them to you like that. That's because of going back to the very beginning and thinking about as many possible things as possible and preparing for them so that you don't get, ooh, we can't do that, or that's going to be a problem. And this is complicated. It is complicated. Like this is not for the faint of heart. Anyone making music, it's not for the, anyone making a record is already a champion in my eyes, right? To be able to go through the procedures and the various stages, and it's an epic task. And then maybe the last one is, I already love every artist that I work with as an engineer, but this has made my appreciation for them even greater. And that is because being back on the artist side, and this isn't the first record I've released. I've been part of many, many records in my career, but it's been a while because I've been only in the studio for quite some time. It is a gargantuan task to bring music to commercially available. And it is a more gargantuan task to make people aware of a project and to do all of the things that are required of the artist, me in this case. But I'm more commonly, I'm working on the back end. I'm mastering someone's record. I'm mixing someone's record. I hand it back to them. I'm a part of their journey, but I'm only a part of it. To be the one who has to drive the bus from the very beginning to the very end has been a reminder of how insanely epic it is. And I'm someone with a capacity to work. I can work. I can put in the hours. I'm fortunate to have developed the skill sets to be able to handle it. Social media, I mean, I'm like a full-time video editor right now. If I don't do it, who's going to do it? Unless I had the financial resources to pay someone. Like, it is so epic. And so what I'd say is, for all the listeners, this isn't about me. This is about artists. We are at a time when the listeners, I think, need to be reminded of this, and need to be because at the end of the day, the ecosystem for an independent artist, or even in my case, like an artist with a label, but I'm not like, I'm not front, I'm not
yeah.
I'm not selling billions of copies. Maybe we will. I don't know. We need to make sure that it's sustainable. We need to make sure that the artists are given all the resources that they need, because this world is not as fun without that art. and we love it. We all love it, and we all appreciate the access to it. And what it takes for someone to bring it to market is so epic. And it just reminds me that, when people see an artist and they see them hustling, they see them doing it, just keep it in mind. Keep it in mind as we go forward in terms of how we look at this entire ecosystem, because it is just epic. And I'm embracing it, and I'm enjoying it and taking it in. But yeah, when someone writes to me and is like, hey, I need this master like tomorrow, it's giving me a different perspective on like, you know what? No problem. I'll stay up late. I'm just a small part of like a 500 item list that artist has got to get across the goal line. So it's been helpful to me in that way.
I think that's a great place to end it. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Justin.
Thank you, Jonathan.
And I would say if you have any kind of multi-channel sound system, whether you have a quad system or 5.1, or you have an Atmos soundbar or whatever, do yourself a favor, listen to this record.